I mean, we get a lot of votes for all of the above. The polls are about engagement, but And we're live. I've been so excited for today because this is such a fun topic. So as you can see, I'm here with Jonathan Reichental, author and smart cities expert. And I'm Keith McCormick. I'm with Cloud Factory. And at Cloud Factory, we provide human-powered data labeling and data processing and annotation while creating meaningful work for people in developing countries. So for that reason, a lot of our clients are doing the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about, whether it be, autonomous vehicles, drones, the whole nine yards. So this is very relevant to us, and it's just such a fun topic, and been very much looking forward to this. So welcome.
Thanks, Keith. It's great to be with you. Love working with you. Love your work, and I'm so pleased to have a chat with you about this great topic.
Yeah, and Jonathan is referring to the fact that we both know each other from from LinkedIn Learning, which is another venue that Jonathan has had to inform folks about what's been changing. Not just smart cities, but the fourth industrial revolution and so on. But particularly focused today on smart cities. So let me tell everybody a little bit about the structure of how we're going to spend our time. If you've seen these events before, we like to keep it very informal and very conversational, but we love Q&A. But we have a lot of things to talk about. So the way that we usually like to do it is around the 40-minute mark, we'll really shift attention from the topics that Jonathan and I have picked out already to ones that you'll ask us about. And my colleagues we're on StreamYard, we're on multiple channels, and my colleagues will help gather that information. So you can start asking questions right now, but we're going to start with some topics that we've prepared and transition a bit later into the live Q&A. So I have an initial question, and then a number of other things that we want to talk about, including the poll results. So first question, and we had both decided this would be a very interesting way to start, is that I've always been intrigued with the kinds of things that you learned in your role as a CIO at Palo Alto and the kinds of things that you were observing. And given the kind of work that I do and the things that I'm involved in now, I'm very curious about data and data that's easy to gather. There's data like you're getting from Internet of Things that accumulating, and other stuff where it's just tougher to get a hold of it, or it's a lot tougher to interpret or process. And I was hoping you could speak to that part of it.
Sure. Yeah. Had a wonderful journey at the city of Palo Alto, often called the birthplace of Silicon Valley. I thought if I'm going to spend time in government in a city, and I'm a tech guy, it's probably a good place to do it. I recognized very early on, back in 2011, 10 years ago now, that data was an incredibly valuable resource for cities. But equally, I recognized that it was not being used. I used to make the comment that everything in government life and city life in particular is about scarcity. There's never enough people, never enough money, too many projects, not enough skills, but there was one thing that there was an abundance, and that was data. And it doesn't matter if you're a little town somewhere or, of course, a big city, you have data because it's what you use to do the work. It's what you gather. It's what you store. It's what you then produce in some derivative form or for decision making. So I was surprised that we had so much data, so much on every single type of topic, but we were not using it to drive forward the agenda and the benefits for the community. One of the first things that I worked on was making that data available to people. Back in 2011, this was still a fairly, rare thing where if you wanted to access a data repository in a city, it was very difficult if you were a stakeholder in the community or, an organization or even a regional or federal agency that needed data. The joke was, if you wanted data, you would get it, but you'd probably get a printout or you would get PDF files, right? But what people want is, the raw data. So we weren't the first, of course, and the movement had already begun to open data up to people. But for a sort of a medium-sized, California town here in Silicon Valley, we were certainly very much at the leading edge of that. And I made it a priority that we would open everything up, everything that was not regulated or private, right? And then the other thing that happened after that was, to get there, you've got to go through a cultural change. And so it doesn't happen overnight. Some people are very reserved about what it means to give complete, transparent visibility to raw data. But you also have to recognize it's the law often, right? So we were one of the first cities in the world to actually pass a resolution to make data open by default. And I'm very proud of that. Very, very proud that we got in front of the council and the community and we said, from this point onward, as we create and collect new data, it would be open by default.
So rather than taking action to open it, in those instances where data for some reason couldn't be fully released, someone had to take action, like a local politician had to take action to not open it and make a case for why that was. Help us all picture what kind of data we're talking about. So take something that, we all experience that, a silver lining during COVID, I think for many of us is that traffic definitely took a break compared to what it was building up to for many years. So take just something like traffic, for instance.
Sure.
What kind of data are we talking about?
Well, we cities collect data on everything. I mean, they really do. It's they're every activity, whether it's traffic or energy or public safety, or public works, everything generates data. The one set I want to share with you, because I think this is one of the most fascinating, was we deployed an app back in approximately 2013 called Palo Alto 311. And it was, an app that would support the principles of 311, which is, just like 911. It's a number you call and you get help for city issues. But we made it digital as well and made it into an app, and people could download it for free, and they still can today, and many cities have this. And if they saw, some trash that was dumped somewhere, or there was a massive pothole, or a dangerous crack in the sidewalk, they could take a photograph. The photograph would go to City Hall. It would get routed to the right team, and then it would get resolved. And for the end user, you get notified, first of all, that your issue was acknowledged, but also it was repaired. So it actually held City Hall accountable. But this wasn't even at the time that unique. We deployed a good solution, but I wanted to go further, and I said, you know what? We're collecting data about the cadence of the city. We're actually collecting data about what people are seeing almost in real time, right? So we were collecting the data, putting it in a repository, and acting on it. So I said, what happens if we just then map that data in near real time on a map, and let decision makers see it as well, City Hall people, elected officials, and community members. So you can get a point in time, well, the moment at which you look at it, what's happening? Where is there issues with significant issues with potholes or abandoned trash or other types of problems, of course. And it became a very interesting decision tool. Because you can't hide from that. There's nothing like sunlight to put focus on something and make people actually respond to it. So this was very unique, and still to this day, it's quite unique that we took data that was produced through one activity and then applied it in a slightly different context to create even higher value. So that information was really good. I will say one more thing. People often ask or challenge me at the time, and have over years, they say, isn't it difficult to make, government data available because it's, there's regulations, there's privacy issues, it's protected. There's, a lot of different barriers you have to go through. And all those things are correct in that certain data is protected. Healthcare data is protected. People's faces, you can't just take a picture as a government and then, make that willy-nilly available.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of privacy challenges and things that are laws that are regional and federal. And so what happens, though, is when you evaluate the vast amount of data in government repositories, most of it doesn't apply to any of those rules. So it's sort of like, it's 80-20, right? Where 80% is like, who cares? Like, this is data that is available to everybody. There's no impact to it. And then there's 20% probably that you have to pay real attention to.
Well, again, which is where I think the default action was a brilliant way to do it, knowing that you could take action in those instances where you had to address those issues, because you would have people on the team to do that. I want to return to just one little piece of that, but just maybe have you expand on it a little bit. So you get somebody that's got their smartphone, they take a picture of a pothole and say, this is a terrible, awful pothole at at this intersection or something. How do you make that in the context of 311 is useful in and of itself, right? They've sent the message, there's a complaint. I'm sure there's some kind of geotagging or something like that.
Yes.
But what other metadata are you either automatically captured? Because after all, it's a picture of a pothole, which computers aren't always good at knowing that that's a pothole, right?
Yeah.
It's not always easy for a human to spot as a pothole. I think we've all accidentally encountered them and not realized until later that we weren't being particularly attentive. So that's all in the system now. How do you help make data like that more useful? Because without that metadata, now you've got all these images in storage somewhere.
Yeah, so it's a little bit like humans as sensors, right? So you're actually relying on a person to enter some extra data. So to your point, we absolutely, just simply by taking the picture with a smartphone, you're getting the location, you're getting time of day. You are hopefully getting some visual cues, right? You're getting the person's information because it does ask you to register. You don't have to, so it could be anonymous. That is, we want people to not have their name be a limitation. So we do say people can do it. So you may or may not have the person's name and other details about the individual if they've entered it, and then they get to potentially categorize it. So is it public safety related or infrastructure related? So there is that. And for example, if the person doesn't know or is doing it fast and doesn't care, they might select other. It might default to other. Now it goes into the city, and they make a determination. They'll do some evaluation. Typically, there's enough information to go and visit the site and figure out what has to be done. In some rare instances, you might just call the person, right? You might just reach out to them on their email or and say, do you have more information, or we're missing this. Didn't happen too often. And it was very, very, very rare, out of thousands of reports, maybe there was one or two where we couldn't act in it because we didn't have enough information. So we're able to capture a lot through, computationally, but also through the humans being the sensor and then the city staff adding even additional metadata.
Well, but it's so interesting because as a modeler myself, you might think once you have thousands of those, you might be able to build a predictive model on where potholes tend to occur.
Yes.
It's something about the road construction type at the time that road was done, or whether of course it's affecting the whole city at the same time. But you get the idea. The interplay of all these variables might help you. The age of the road and whether or not it's the kind of a road that would have trucks going on it or just passenger vehicles and so on.
Very good point. If I could add, I see where you were headed with that. Is a very important insight. When we took that data and we started mapping it, in near real time against a map of the city, we had sort of the equivalent of a heat map. So where we would see a lot of something, it would show up in deep red, and then not so much outside of that. And then you could double click and zero in on what's going on there. So what that allows us to do, and allowed the city to do to a certain degree, was to look at root cause, which I think is really what your question was trying to get to. that's what I would call, a level of maturity that, cities have to get to. Some of them are just struggling with deploying the software, right? Some of them are struggling with the actual workflow. But now, once you've kind of mastered that, now, and I have always advocated for, layers of innovation. Let's escalate, and then now you sort of look at, for example, there's an area of a city that looks like it's got a lot of graffiti, and the city goes in, cleans it up, but the graffiti comes out again. And we look at the data over time. We say, it's really interesting. The data, the graffiti issue started 8 months ago, and it didn't happen before that. What has changed? So you visit the schools, perhaps you see there's a lot of schools in the area, and it turns out they've changed the release times when kids are being let out of school, or a after-school program has shut down. It turns out they're more idle and they're creating graffiti. So you can see now that there is this connection between that data and the patterns, and actually taking action to eliminate the root cause, which is really what you want to do.
Yeah, because that large volume of image data, there's so much, because the geotagging alone, that and the caption, could be something that would automatically help the folks prioritize, let's visit that intersection and fix that pothole. But then all that accumulated image data, you could try to get the bounds of the pothole, or measure its dimensions. And now you have thousands of those, and you could do this, root cause stuff, which would be really powerful. So I want to acknowledge, that we did a poll, and we had quite a few people participate that. And naturally, there were the biggest vote, not surprisingly, was folks that were interested in all the topics, which we're excited about. But of the other three choices that we gave them, future of smart cities, the data that cities collect, and the impact of transportation tech, I'm always curious about the autonomous vehicle thing, but the one that got the most votes out of those three was the future of smart cities. So maybe at a high level, in honor of the poll results, could you talk a little bit about the smart cities movement and what it's all about, and maybe some of the cities in the world that are doing particularly interesting stuff that to many of us, if we were to visit them, they would already feel like the city of the future.
Well, I should say right at the outset that I wrote the book on this. I wrote Smart Cities for Dummies. So,
and I have the book, and it's I spent a lot of time with this preparing for today. So I want to thank you for the care that you put into that, because it really was something. I wanted to congratulate you on the kids book as well. Just to maybe you could just briefly tell folks that it exists, and what that idea was.
Yeah, absolutely happy. And then we can, delighted to come back to your original question. So Smart Cities for Dummies, you can find out more, smartcitybook.com, or go to Amazon or your favorite bookstore. Really popular, bestseller all over the world. But it's really interesting. Often when people would write to me and say, Jonathan, I liked your book, they would say, but guess who's reading it right now? My kids. And I'm like, really? That actually surprised me. So kids love the topic of their cities. They love things like autonomous vehicles and the energy revolution and all the cool things that are happening in our communities. And so I was sort of struck by that thought. Later on, a children's author here in Sacramento in California reached out to me and said, had I considered writing a kids book about the future cities? And I said, no, hadn't planned to do it, but I've been kind of struck by the idea that maybe kids need to know about this topic too. So we ended up writing this really, I'm just so thrilled with this book called Exploring Smart Cities Activity Book for Kids. And, it's just
such a cool concept. So let me reframe my question about the future a little bit. As you gave that lens some thought, right? I mean, tackling the topic from that thought. What are the kinds of things that you think when young kids are reading about this, that they're the most excited to have when they're adults? Picture like a 10-year-old kid. What are they really hoping is going to be there when they're 20?
Well, I will say this, having worked deeply in many communities, but particularly in Palo Alto community, when I would visit the schools and talk about cities or ask the kids for their input, the biggest issue they had is no one was asking them to be involved. No one was engaging them, and nobody cared about the kids. So big suggestion, recommendation that I can throw out there is, if you're a city leader or you're a CIO or a city manager or council member, the kids and the teenagers want to be part of the conversation, and they have a lot to add. Just like any kid, the cool stuff is important. They definitely are intrigued by drones and by robotics that are coming to our cities. It is a topic that a lot of us don't think about, and children don't think about. You don't really think about your city until you need something or you go behind the scenes. And I'm the product. I mean, I'm the case study in that. When I went from the private sector into serving in the public sector, it was overwhelming, the things that I hadn't considered and hadn't thought about, outside of government. I just sort of took it for granted when I got up in the morning, the electricity worked, and the water was hot and cold, and it flowed, and there was drinking water, and the traffic signals worked, and we can complain, but a heck of a lot works every day. By the way, a lot of stuff works.
So are you suggesting that a lot of the innovation won't be maybe as visible as we think, like water conservation or using less electricity? Is that might be where the big changes will be over the next 5 or 10 years, is truly dramatic changes, but perhaps not always visible ones. Is that what you're suggesting?
A lot of it will be like, some things will be visible. We'll get, autonomous vehicles for sure. Drones are going to be visible, and the impact both of those things, by the way, they're going to have on the planning and design of cities. But yes, I mean, better use of water, for example. The huge infrastructure investments that we're about to make, and many communities around the world are making, are not visible. They're, the moving from carbon-based energy to non-carbon-based energy. Sure, you may have solar panels on your roof. You may read about it in newspapers or see it on TV. But if you're a community that is collecting non-carbon energy from into your grid from another source at a geographic distance, you probably are not going to again be aware of it. People are very aware of the things that they see. Like the quality of the road, as you said, the quality of infrastructure, bridges, beautiful parks. We absolutely recognize those. We have to retrofit millions of buildings, right? And you won't see a lot of that, right? A lot of it is about putting in more efficient air conditioning, or swapping out types of materials, and also changing the mix of energy sources. So our buildings are going to hugely change, and they have to. By the way, this is a
now I know that you've returned to the private sector, but did COVID accelerate that because of all the particularly in schools, for instance, filtration and so on? Do you think that most cities maybe were caught off guard and then had to deal with the filtration, or would the hope be that many of them have also dealt with some of the efficiencies that you described, kind of more green buildings? What's your sense of what's been going on there?
Well, so COVID emerged approximately March of 2020. It's now July 2021. That's 16 months or something, if I did my math correctly. Nothing changes that quickly in government or in cities. So, this idea that everything has changed in our cities, it's a myth. We are in the process of evolving. There were changes in how two big visible changes from the government implemented side. One is, government workers, a lot of them had to work from home. So they had to get laptop computers overnight when they didn't have them, believe it or not. But they also needed more access to remote applications. So migration to cloud computing, for example, that did accelerate. The use of remote tools like Zoom and StreamYard and other applications boomed. We saw the rapid increase in deliveries. And, whilst that is a city phenomena, because there were less cars overall, the delivery system sort of kind of grew organically, and we didn't have to make a lot of changes. What we had to think about was, when the normal traffic resumes, how will deliveries work, right? Because now you've got competing things. You've got one-lane roads where there are 2 or 3 delivery trucks dropping things off. Well, That's not going to work if you have to have cars getting
Well,
places.
because in essentially you have a lane where you have people park vehicles that have come to a stop much more frequently than typical because they're stopping their whole route. So let's stay focused with that, actually, that aspect for a while. Let's
Sure.
zero in on transportation. At Cloud Factory, we're involved in this kind of thing, obviously, because transportation is where a lot of the large data sets and the data annotation is needed. Helping computers identify stop signs and pedestrians and vehicles and so on. So what do you think we'll see first? Is it going to be pizza delivery or, Amazon Prime, or is it going to be what? How do you see this unfolding, and how soon is this? Is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years out?
Yeah, everybody wants to know when. I wish if I knew the exact date, I would be a great investor. Think about that, right? Unfortunately, some of this stuff is not precise, and there are hidden surprises around the corner. Here's a few things I will say, sort of off the bat. First of all, autonomous vehicles are coming in a big way. The cars are going to drive themselves. All sorts of vehicles are going to drive themselves. That's, to me, a done deal. The debate is over for me. I've moved on now. We're going to see, actually, in the long term, I don't think humans are going to drive vehicles. I think that actually will be outlawed. The same way as riding a horse down an interstate today is probably not a good thing, and you probably get a ticket or you get into trouble, right? So you won't be able to drive. We can't have human drivers and computer drivers on the same roads. It won't be optimized. You've got to go full technology, full AI for the autonomous future to actually work. When this happens, when this starts to transition, and by the way, it will happen faster than most of us anticipate. You might be saying, well, it's probably 2050s, maybe the second half of the 21st century. This decade, we're in 2021, this decade is going to be quite significant. There will be sizable implementations of autonomous vehicles of all sorts by the end of this decade already. I mean, we already see it. You gave some examples there, pizza delivery, medicine delivery. There's several communities, in particular, the city of Phoenix in Arizona has a fully autonomous on-demand car service. It's run by Waymo, Google's little spinoff. And you can, on your phone, summon a car and go anywhere in the city. And the cars, those that have traveled in them, my friends and other people I've spoken to, said they feel safer and they drive, quickly, and they get you to your destination with comfortable and safely. We're going to see a lot of autonomous vehicles on campuses, like university campuses, industrial campuses, in factory settings. We're going to see a lot of autonomous vehicles at airports and in stadiums. A lot of contained areas, where if you go to a football game, you'll see little carts maybe moving food around and stuff. That'll all be autonomous.
So I have a follow-up for you. Let me see if I'm following the logic here, because you're in lots of conversations, about this. I know that you do the smart city conference circuit and so on.
Sure.
If it's difficult to have human drivers and autonomous vehicles coexisting, right? And I think we can anticipate the challenges there, right? It's going to be a little while, at least, before we're talking about vehicles that have no steering wheel and have no driver's seat, right? Because we're going to go into some kind of transition. So are you suggesting that one of the things that we might see is a college campus, of substantial size that simply has no cars and goes pedestrian only? Because if you have shuttles and stuff that can take you from a parking lot to the dorm, that maybe is where you start, and that maybe cities have, driverless neighborhoods or something. Am I making a wild leap, or is that where?
Well, I think the concept that campuses of all types will have, these completely autonomous vehicles, no steering, just basically seats. That's going to happen quickly. And it should be noted, it already happens. There are many campuses in the world. I'll talk about one quickly, an organization I work with, the Saudi Telecom Corporation, the biggest telecom in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They have autonomous buses for getting their staff around. There's no humans in these things. You just hop onto these buses, they take you to your destination. So let's get beyond, the question of whether it's going to happen. It's happening, and the question is now how fast. I'm not so sure about the idea that we would have maybe these short hoppers or something in neighborhoods. I think what you could have, and this is something really being debated, is in some communities, some cities, you'll have sections that are just for autonomous vehicles and some sections that are for human drivers. A little bit of a coordination issue. I don't know if communities are going to be terribly excited about how that would work. But there may be instances in certain areas where that makes a lot of sense, particularly maybe very, very complex intersections or complex areas. What made me think of it,
Jonathan, to be honest, is that quite recently on LinkedIn, you were praising what they've done with Times Square and Manhattan.
Yeah,
that it's pedestrian only, and I'm thinking that if there's a lot of because New York has taxis everywhere you look, there's taxis, but a lot of cities don't have the volume of taxis that New York does. But in that environment, you could have a very large pedestrian area. Denver, I'm sure has an extended, pretty
yes,
big 10 or 15 block period, that's a block section of the city that's all pedestrian only. And at the moment, there's a human-driven shuttle that goes up and down. But that's one of the things that allows you to enjoy downtown Denver without having to jump in a taxi or something like that. It's because that shuttle is just going up and down that one road back and forth.
There won't be a driver in that soon.
Yeah,
that driver's that person needs to look for another job. That's going away. I love that you bring that up. If I can even connect a few things you've asked about, the pandemic, people's interest in the future, plus autonomous vehicles, and thinking about the relationship between vehicles and people. Is this idea of increased focus on placemaking and giving back cities to people. And that's exactly what New York did. They were pretty early in the topic. They only wanted to make Times Square pedestrian for a short period of time, but it was so successful on so many levels, reduced accidents by 40%, for example, that they said, hey, let's make this permanent. And it's been a very big success. The one story that I want to share with you and those watching is what Paris just announced. So incredible city. We all know it, the City of Lights. One of the first places in the world to have, lights on street, electrical lights on streets. And they have announced that their major thoroughfare going down, the center of Paris is the Champs-Élysées. And it's got cafes and beautiful stores, and it's got trees, and it's gorgeous. But like a lot of popular areas and cities all over the world, it's been overly accessed and it's been worn down. I mean, there's millions of tourists all the time, and too many cars, too noisy, too dirty, whatever. And so what we're seeing now is this phenomena, which Paris will be one of the leaders on, is they're going to convert the Champs-Élysées into a city garden. And effectively, there'll be very few vehicles, and those that are actually on the street, they'll have small lanes either side, will likely be autonomous vehicles. So now what you have is a beautiful, quiet, you got trees and plants and flowers and even little vegetable gardens they're going to put in there on this incredibly important street. And it's going to change the game. It's going to change the game. And that's something that has been in the works for a while, but got a little bit of a boost because COVID reminded us that humans, all of us were at home. We needed to go out for walks, and we wanted to take our bicycles out, and we wanted to walk our pets, and we wanted to enjoy the city. And we suddenly realized, wow, we've basically paved our cities and built them for cars, not for people.
Does all of this imply that that the autonomous vehicle for public transportation market might take off a little bit sooner than us getting autonomous vehicles in lieu of our personal vehicles, for these reasons, because of the way cities are changing and so on? Is that a reasonable bet to place in terms of the timing? We don't know the years, but might public transportation take off sooner than private vehicles?
It's a great, insightful question, Keith. And I actually I maybe have a surprise for you. We're not going to own cars. We're actually over peak car, which means the most amount of cars that were ever sold have sold already. And what we're seeing now is less and less car purchases. Just generally, there's a new generation that has decided, those that live in big cities, they don't want a car. But as we go to an autonomous world, ask any of the major CEOs from Ford, General Motors, Volkswagen, BMW, they won't be mass producing cars in the future. They have to transition their businesses because all transportation will be public transportation. You won't own a car. You'll just and the reason I say this, here's just a little bit of economics on this. It costs about $1 per mile to have a car in America. $1 per mile. No matter what, if you bake in sort of the cost of the car, the gas, the maintenance, and if you drive it to somewhere, it's going to be X dollars, right? Now, if you were to get the equivalent in an on-demand vehicle, today it's still more expensive. It's still more than $1 per mile. So the economics says it's more efficient for me to own a car than it is to get public transport or to get a nice, someone else to drive me. But once on-demand vehicles don't have humans in them, the cost will drop very, very quickly. And the economics will say it's easier for me to, demand a car on my phone than it is for me to have a car in my garage. And that's where we make that transition.
Okay.
We
so
won't
in other words,
own cars.
for millions and millions of people, it will be cheaper to take all the money they spend each month on robo taxis, for people that are living in cities and the kind of environment that we're talking about. If you add up the money they're spending on their robo taxi app, whatever brands, come to be for that, they add that up. They're going to say economically, it doesn't make sense for me to, particularly in a city like New York, where a garage spot costs as much as a suburban home.
Yes.
So I can see how that tips the scales. So there's so many exciting things to talk about. But there's another really big topic that's super important. So geospatial and drones. So an area that we're really active in is geospatial for things like ag tech. Images of a plant, and is it healthy, or does it need a pesticide, all that kind of stuff. But obviously drones are coming to cities too. So I'm fascinated just to pretend I'm a fly on the wall for the kind of conversations that people have about airspace in these drones, because if you're right about the cars, and I'm sure you are, then that will be a mitigating factor to keep traffic perhaps from, I'm going to dream for a moment, maybe traffic peaked before COVID. I don't know. It's probably going to come back before the forces that you described, right? But maybe for those of us, that live to be 80 or 100 years old or something like that, maybe we'll look back and think that the worst traffic we ever experienced was 2019. It would be kind of a fantasy scenario. But even if that's true, because as you said, vehicles will be more public and less private. Drones are just at the beginning of the curve. So how do you handle airspace, and what applications of drones do you see coming?
Yeah. Well, so autonomous vehicles we think are coming. I said we'll see major migrations towards the end of this decade and beyond. Drones are going to happen a lot faster. And, I often think about my life before I had a smartphone and my life after a smartphone. And I think about, wow, that happened fast. One day I didn't have a smartphone. Next day I did, and had all these applications. I wish I'd anticipated it, because as I said earlier, I'm a great investor. The same thing's going to happen with drones. And here I am with you in July 2021. I'm saying to you, drones are coming, and they're coming in a very, very big way. So if you're an entrepreneur, or you're into data, this is going to mean incredibly rapidly merging ecosystem and set of
so how are cities getting ready for that eventuality?
Well, just like cities are laggards. Cities are often responsive, so they aren't necessarily. Look, it's probably not a surprise. There are so many distractions in city life that often you're not prioritizing the things that might happen, but your work is revolving around what has happened or what is happening. Drones are going to take the form, by the way, they're going to be on the ground and they're going to be in the air. So there's terrestrial and airborne drones. We already see the use of terrestrial drones in many cities in the world for deliveries, even in Palo Alto and still in many Silicon Valley cities here. We have an enterprise called Starship who does autonomous drone deliveries mainly for fast food, but I think you can do medicine and things like that as well. Airborne drones.
People haven't experienced it. I can't resist a little bit of a follow-up in there. Let's say I'm staying at a hotel in Palo Alto. I'm out visiting Silicon Valley, let's say, and I wanted to just have that experience of having some food delivered by drone. What would that experience likely be like? Is it companies like a DoorDash or something, just to throw out a potential?
Yeah.
Who's doing it in Palo Alto specifically? Because obviously it's not in that many cities yet.
Yeah. So I have been in Palo Alto for 3 years or so. So I don't know the answer to Palo Alto. At the time when I was there, we were experimenting. What will the thing is, when you use DoorDash, the incredibly popular delivery system today, you don't know how the person's getting to your house. You don't know if it's a man or a woman. You really don't know any details. All you care about is that the food's going to be. You're going to get a text message, or your doorbell's going to ring, and there's going to be food for you, right? Yeah. So as these organizations realize that the economics are so much lower of having robots, that it'll just be a robot will beep you when it's outside. You'll go out, it'll open because you'll have the code with your phone. You pick up your food up and it'll go away. Now, what's going to happen is the terrestrial is a lot easier than the flying. The flying is still, an engineering challenge, although we are overcoming it. FedEx, Amazon, UPS, they're all in very advanced stages of airborne drone delivery work, and they've got pilots around the world. I mean, pilots that they're trying it out, not actual pilots. So we're going to see delivery in a big way. What's going to happen is, when you think about the airspace, because this was part of your question, is what are cities doing about it? It's the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority, based in Washington, D.C., that controls the sky above your head, not the city. Right? So, in many aspects of our lives, in the United States in particular, how everything is governed is,
of course,
it's demarked very specifically between what the federal government can do, the state, the county, and the city, right? So when it comes to issues of drones, it's largely, a regional or national a set of rules. Now, there can be negotiation and there can be local specifics, of course. But generally, what you're seeing is the FAA is working deeply with FedEx and Amazon and others on how to actually implement this. And they'll give guidance to cities, and cities have to have a voice. Mayors in America have to have a voice on this. These things might be a little noisy. They might be a little bit dangerous occasionally. What happens if a drone falls, onto your head?
You know what? I imagine at some point there will be like the first drone collision, just like the first car accident was.
Oh, sure.
And the technology is very advanced, and I'm sure the risks will be minimized. But at some point that will happen, and I'm sure it'll be all over the news that night, and everybody will be talking about the implications for the future. I want to acknowledge the great questions we've been getting and encourage people to ask more. As I mentioned, usually with the last 20 minutes to go. So we had so many cool things going on. I'm going to transition to questions going now. I want to acknowledge Paul's question, and welcome, Paul. Paul's name is one that I recognize. Not 100% sure, Paul, if that's a comment or a question, but he's talking about real-time second-to-second data on a map and how that really changes our perspectives. But I think he's raising that as a comment more than a question. So, Paul, I invite you to clarify on that. But, really getting into the geotagging and how detailed it is. So I want to circle back to Paul. Matilda, I want to thank you for your question. Matilda's really looking forward to smart cities, but wondering how we should use metadata while protecting personal data privacy. So we talked a little bit about that, where the geotagging with the pothole could be anonymous, and they could volunteer some information. But could you comment a little bit more about how to have open data while protecting privacy? Because I know you're really active in that community.
Yeah. So first of all, I am against the notion of smart cities as surveillance cities. As a sort of a leading thinker and voice on this topic, people want to confront that straight on. they hear about sensors and about data collection, and immediately you go to the surveillance city. We have to, first of all, I want to be clear that I don't believe in that, and I think we have to take the steps and put in place the regulation and be really smart about it. When we were getting ready to deploy data sets in the city, so we would have some pool of data that we'd either collected or were collecting ongoing. And so the question was, how can we now go ahead and put that online and make anyone in the world have access to it, the real raw data? So we had a process in place. We had a set of gates that it would go through to be vetted. And so the first thing you might ask is it good data? This is obviously topical for you guys. You definitely don't want to be making available data that has lots of errors in it. So you got to do some good work to make sure the data, to vet that it's good and confirm that. Then you might ask a question, is it protected by any laws, right? So is it health data? Well, if it's health data here in the US, that's protected data. You can't share that. Is it personally identifiable? Is it your name and address? Maybe your age, right? There are things. Then you would ask the question, okay, so it gets through that. It's all clear. Now we ask the question, is there a security implication? And so one of the interesting things is back to the geospatial question, because I think that was one thing you wanted to talk about quite a lot, is geospatial is probably the most important data in a city. Everything so much revolves around where things are and the information of where things are and what they are. And so, if you're a city that has, electrical substations, potholes, or excuse me, potholes, I can't think of the name, but the thing that you go through to go underground,
Oh, you mean like we're talking about the channel between London and
No, just on the street, and everyone's screaming at the screen right now, trying to say, I'll say the manhole cover, but I don't think we say manhole anymore because it's.
But you don't mean a pedestrian. Well, see, now I'm picturing Paris, where if you don't want to walk across the crazy traffic of the Champs-Elysees, you take a. But you're not talking about the sewer system, are you? Because you were saying
could be the sewer system. So,
okay.
I'm saying that could be the kind of data I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You can easily arrive at the answer is that is not data necessarily that you want everyone to have access to, because there are people in the world who want to do harm to your city. And if they know where the electrical points are and the major fiber intersections for internet, and they know where the sewer system is, that's like giving them the blueprints to do harm. So it's a long way of saying, and you asked me about my views on privacy and how do we protect things, is we've got to be smart about this, not stupid. Let's make sure that we vet the data. We're making the right choices. We're protecting people, both people's privacy rights, plus also their safety. And we go through every city needs to go through those steps and then release it. Now, in most instances, that'll go really fast. I'm not actually describing a massively bureaucratic process. I'm saying, it's going to catch that 20% that is sensitive, but the other 80% should fly through it, and it has no privacy implications.
Yeah. Well, in your earlier answer to Matilda's question, allowing 311 respondents to be anonymous, because even though you prefer that they share some information about them so you can better help them, you recognize that you'll get less engagement if you don't allow the anonymous option. Right. Joshua has a question as well. I guess there would have to be state and local government and federally backed bill to say, oh yeah, this is kind of getting into I'm going to ask a two-part question. I'm going to try to match these two because it's very interesting. So Joshua was asking about obviously it would be local and federal government would have to kind of all agree that, okay, in these areas, you're not going to have okay, so let's be really radical now. I'm actually visiting New York tomorrow night, so I hope I don't make any local New Yorkers upset. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that Manhattan were driverless only in 20 years, just to say. How would two questions are related to that? With your experience, in city government when you were, at Palo Alto, how does that conversation even begin, right? I mean, is that complete, pie in the sky? Because actually, one thing about Manhattan is that I'm sure you know this, Robert Moses, I guess it was back in the 50s, wanted to have interstate highways zigzagging all over Manhattan, because the notion is that you'd live on Long Island, but you would take the multi-lane highway to a big office building, but have this separate quiet suburban retreat versus big office buildings. And obviously city planning has gone in a very different direction than 70 years ago. So Manhattan, unlike most cities, does have this unique thing where a lot of New Yorkers don't have cars at all. Right. So that's what made me think of Manhattan. Again, I don't know what New Yorkers think of that. They may be, I may see activity on Twitter later. But the related question is, what if you just love cars? Like Jay Leno's a car collector. What do you think, if we're going 50 years out, what do you think we're going to do with these vintage, gasoline cars with the driving wheel and so on? If those become rare, a little bit of a crazy question, but I thought a really interesting one. So I mashed those two questions together.
There's a lot there. The first part, was it more about regionalization? Like if New York does it, nobody else does it?
If Manhattan, maybe you'll get a call later based on this suggestion. If Manhattan was reaching out to you and said, we're contemplating this crazy idea of making the island of Manhattan autonomous vehicle only. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting this is going to happen. It's going to happen right away. But then they call you tonight, in the city of New York wants your 2 cents on that. How would you even go about contemplating such a thing?
Yeah. Well, it's going to happen. The migration to autonomous vehicles is sort of right now it's a little trickle. It'll turn into a little flow, and then it'll be a storm after a while, and that it's going to build and build, and it's going to be global in nature. Like everything else, like all progress on the planet over the last few hundred years, it won't be evenly distributed, right? So some cities will go first, some because their mayors are strong advocates. There could be regions or even states. We have to see how that plays out. It would be, I'll answer the question just slightly differently, which is there is this idea potentially of a hub and spoke model, particularly for deliveries. So what happens is there's these self-driving massive trucks doing deliveries on the interstates. So they're all self-driving, and then they're going to go to New York. So they will park at a special place outside the city, and then these little autonomous vehicles would pick up parcels and then go to neighborhoods, and then maybe even smaller ones or even drones would then fly out into people's apartments or yards and things. So we have to think through all sorts of different ideas as we think about how you would go about doing this. It's going to depend on geography and the financing, political environment, cultural, right? As most technology and change does. And so if you held me down and said, Jonathan, what would you tell the mayor of New York? I might, start with stuff that is low-hanging fruit, like maybe on a couple of university campuses, maybe with the taxis, maybe with deliveries. And then progressively expand it from there. The second part of your question is, people don't need to worry. Their cars are not going to be dragged away from them anytime soon, right? But it's likely, I'll say this with a certain degree of confidence. If you have a child in your life right now, if you have a 2-year-old in your house or a 3-year-old, you have a nephew or niece in your life, that child will probably never buy a car. That's how close we are, right? So, that's often used as a data point. So to get a sense of it, if you've got a kid, that kid will never buy a car, so they won't care.
Okay, I'm gonna caution you, Jonathan, that will almost certainly be within a month's time a LinkedIn quote with your picture. Your 2 or 3-year-old nieces or nephews might never buy a car. And
I stand behind that. Yeah. I stand behind that. I'm okay with
that. we usually choose our juicy quotes after the event, but I'm putting money on that quote like right now that we're going to do that, and it will be fabulous to get the comments and the feedback from everybody.
What you're such a great point. I love that. Thank you for doing that. You'll find people who absolutely disagree, of course, and we welcome. Let's have a good, rigorous conversation. All voices need to be listened to.
Terry had a really interesting follow-up, and this may be our last question, actually, Jonathan.
Sure.
Even though don't hold back, or keep on asking questions if you need to. But Terry's questions may be the last one. Speeding is one of the biggest contributors to accidents. Europe has led with remote radar detection systems. Is this an example of surveillance technology? So, in other words, Terry's kind of circling back to Matilda's question about, how can we have open data while still maintaining privacy? You were saying that you don't want to turn cities into surveillance, but it would. Well, I'm reluctant to do this, but I'm going to take a first stab at the question, then ask you to comment.
Please.
If there's no human drivers, then speeding becomes something very different, right? Because there's not speeding in the sense that we talk about speeding now, right? Because the vehicles would be constrained, but it's probably also the case that if all vehicles are autonomous, we might be looking at higher speed limits down the road, right? So there's a lot to unpack there, but your comments.
I like that a lot. It's been said that, autonomous vehicles will be the kindest, safest, most pleasant vehicles ever made because they will never get angry. They'll never get drunk. They will never be taking medicine. They won't care. Nobody will flick the finger. So they will stop when they have to. They'll accelerate when they have to. So they will do this a lot better than we do it as humans. We're very bad at it. So I was in New Zealand a couple of years ago, one of my favorite countries in the world. And when I did my work was finished, I took a few days to explore the country, and I drove. I rented a car and drove, as you have to. Got back to the United States, and a month later, I get a letter from New Zealand police. I was speeding in one of the areas. I don't remember. I don't have any. So basically, look, it happens. It's certainly a cultural thing. There's some societies frown on that. Others, that, as the question noted, in many cultures in Europe and certainly in Australia and in New Zealand, we're way past that. If the camera will pick you up and send you a letter with your fine.
Yeah, the technology may change. Yeah, but that's the automatic photograph of your license plate, at a traffic area, has been common, for really quite some time. Okay, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I could certainly enjoy going considerably longer, but we should wrap up. So I want to thank everyone, since it's the summer months, and especially as some parts of the world are emerging, from COVID. I think people are especially anxious to get out there and enjoy their summer. So we are going to take a break from these events in the month of August, but we're going to be back in September. We haven't announced, the date yet, but so that you don't miss out, I encourage you, follow Jonathan, follow Cloud Factory. You're certainly welcome to follow me as well, all on LinkedIn. All three of our feeds and channels are, look at that. Jonathan has cleverly added
Twitter.
Reichental there. Oh, that's your Twitter. Yeah, I had a Twitter comment that I wanted to ask about, but we'll just have to continue the conversation, on LinkedIn. So again, we're taking a break, but please join us for September, October, and November. And the best way to do that again is to follow all of our LinkedIn feeds and go check out. My colleagues will tell me if I'm messing this up. We can actually put it in the chat. cloudfactory.com/events is one place to look for upcoming, but also cloudfactory.com/webinars, which is easy to remember. You'll be able to see the previous events as well, right? So again, Jonathan, I want to thank you so much and encourage folks to check out the book. And let's continue the conversation in the chat below the replay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.